Imagine paying for a ticket to stare at the very treasures your ancestors carved, forged, and blessed, while a stranger behind glass tells you they are no longer yours. Then, as you stand there, they calmly explain that what was taken in blood and fire is simply spoils of war, perfectly legal, and therefore rightfully theirs. That is exactly the kind of argument a European commentator made on national television, insisting that priceless African artifacts looted during colonial conquests should stay in European museums because, at the time, looting in war was legal. He admitted it might not have been moral, but insisted it was lawful, and therefore final. No going back to the 19th century, or the 18th, or the 17th, he said. No talking about colonized peoples who weren't independent countries, yet. The colonial powers took what they wanted, called it lawful, and centuries later, their museums still claim to be the rightful owners. Welcome back to Africa Now Stories, and a special welcome if you're joining us for the first time. This is the home of bold, unfiltered stories from every corner of the continent, from hard-hitting political updates and investigative journalism to celebrity gist, sports, music, and entertainment. If you want African stories told with clarity, courage, and a Pan-African lens, you're in the right place. Before we dive deeper, make sure you like this video, share it, and subscribe so you never miss our next upload. If you want to go a step further in supporting our work, you can use YouTube's Super Thanks feature. It helps us keep bringing you the stories many others prefer to ignore. We also want to hear from you, so leave your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or add context, but keep it respectful and thoughtful. And remember, this video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is based on publicly available sources and commentary, aims to avoid misinformation, and is produced in line with YouTube's community guidelines. Now let's get back to the story. On that television set, the man's position was chillingly simple. These artifacts belong to the museums that hold them now. But because there were laws. Because, in his words, looting in war was legal in the 19th century. He tried to sound reasonable as he drew a line between moral and legal, but always came back to the same conclusion.
These artifacts, who do they belong to?
They belong to the museums where they are now, because there are laws, and if even for the artifacts which were looted in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the war, there was laws, and the looting of war was legal. Maybe it's not moral, but it's legal. And if you want to come back on this, why don't you come back 19th century, 17th century, 16th century? You cannot stop. You don't know where to stop.
At the time, they weren't independent countries.
Yes.
So, of course, the colonial power can decide to take stuff. I mean, it is looting, isn't it?
No. It is looting, yes. Part of it was looting. But if you have read the report, I did read the report in English because I didn't get the French version. And the report says it's not only the war looting which must be returned, but everything. The scientific expeditions where they collected artifacts, they must give it back. The gifts from the colonial administration, you must give it back. Actually, you are going to give back to some countries, and they are not reclaiming it, because it's only the Benin which reclaim the artifacts, not the other ones.
Only Benin is claiming it?
Yes.
And that raises the other question, how do we get African kids to see their own artifacts?
Yes, you can do this, I think I milite for cooperation between French museums and Africa to organize exhibitions of art, African art. You can organize exhibitions permanently.
And how does that go? Because there's the question of
Yes.
The pieces when they travel around Africa. Does it go okay?
Yes, it's okay to send them to Africa, but they must return to the French museums where they belong.
So why is there this promise from Emmanuel Macron?
I don't know, you must ask him, but I think he was like a witch who doesn't know what he does, but because he says we are going to give it back, as if these artifacts it doesn't belong to anyone but the French museums. And it's very interesting because we saw an example in Senegal, I think it was a museum in Senegal. In Senegal you have a museum, IFAN Museum, which has in its collections many works of art from many other countries from Africa, and it was a collection built during the colonial area. Are they going to give it back to the other countries, this museum in Senegal? I don't think so.
But if they were stolen...
No, they were not stolen. It was looting, yes, but there were laws.
I don't get this distinction between looting and stealing.
No, it was stolen if you want, but in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 17th century, during all the wars, art was stolen. So we must give back everything or nothing. And more of this, these works of art, when they were taken, if they were not taken, they would have disappeared, because many of artifacts, African artifacts, are made of wood, and wood it was not made to be kept, you know, so it would have disappeared. It became
right. These artifacts who, would have disappeared in the past,
yes,
but don't anymore. You talked about exhibiting more of these works in Africa.
Yes.
What do you do to help African countries to have proper museums that are with the proper funding so that they can keep things climate controlled and to preserve the works when they go over there? What needs to be done?
They need advice from people who know what is a museum, who know to build them. So we know this and we can help them to do this. And even in the report they say that there are 500 museums in Africa. Maybe. So maybe there are already museums which can conserve these works of art. But we must help them. There are much money from France to Africa, and it's good for helping Africa. Maybe part of this money...
I was going to say, Didier, because you were on a panel here where you were very critical when there was the opening of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi,
yes,
saying France's cultural diplomacy was misguided. What can the French government do specifically when it comes in this regard? Should they be devoting more energy to Africa to help them?
They can help Africa. I don't see why they could not help Africa when they are renting their collections to Abu Dhabi, you know, because Abu Dhabi has money and Africa has less money. I think we must help Africa. It's not the point. The point is we must not return art which actually doesn't belong to them.
All right, Didier.
The law, written by the powerful, makes the loot legitimate. He went even further. He argued that at the time of these seizures, the African territories were not independent nations, so the colonial powers had every right to decide to take stuff. Yes, ceded, some of it was looting, some of it was stealing. If you insist on those words, still, that was how war worked for centuries. If you start undoing that history, where do you stop? If you return these works, do you go all the way back to every empire, every conflict, every century? In his mind, it was either return everything that ever changed hands through war, or return nothing at all. He did not stop at the past. He questioned present-day efforts to reclaim African heritage. He pointed out that, in his view, only Benin was seriously demanding the return of its treasures, while other countries were quieter. He suggested that if African children want to see their own artifacts, the answer is not restitution but cooperation. European museums organizing exhibitions in Africa, sending pieces on tour before bringing them safely back home to their European vaults. By the way, as you follow this story, jump into the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Africa, the diaspora, or beyond. Your voice matters in this conversation. When asked about African capacity to house and protect these works, he adopted a paternal tone. He said it was fine to send pieces to Africa temporarily, but they must return to the French museums where, in his words, they truly belong. He dismissed the French president's pledges to return some artifacts, almost mocking them, suggesting they made no sense because the museums, not the source communities, are the rightful owners. The objects, he insisted, do not belong to any nation or people, only to the institutions that hold them now. To strengthen his argument, he pointed to a museum in Senegal that holds artworks from various African countries, many collected in the colonial era. Are they going to give those back, he asked, almost triumphantly. He doubted it. And so he tried to paint a picture of shared guilt. If an African museum isn't returning its colonial-era collection to other African states, why should European museums be expected to do any better? On the question of theft, he played with words. Were they stolen? Looted? Taken? He eventually conceded that yes, if you want, you can call it stealing. But he immediately neutralized that admission by insisting that art had been taken during wars for centuries, all over the world. His conclusion was blunt: unless the world is ready to unravel the entire history of war and empire, nothing should be returned. Then came his most cynical argument, that European museums actually saved many of these objects. He claimed that because a lot of African artifacts were made from wood and other perishable materials, they would have rotted away if they had remained on the continent. According to him, they were not meant to be kept, and by removing them, European powers preserved what would otherwise have disappeared. In his narrative, the conqueror becomes the savior. He did admit that many African countries now have museums, hundreds in fact, and said they might be able to conserve these works. But even here, he framed Europe as the teacher and Africa as the student. African nations, he suggested, need European expertise, European advice, European money to build proper climate-controlled museums. His bottom line, however, never shifted. Yes, help Africa? Yes. Send some funds? Yes. Maybe organize exhibitions. But no, do not return the art. It does not, in his view, belong to them. For many viewers, his words landed like a punch to the gut. Here was the legacy of colonial theft dressed up as polite legalism and museum policy. Here was someone saying, in essence, that because might once made right, that dominance must be respected forever. The backlash was swift. South African-born comedian and commentator Trevor Noah publicly dismantled the argument, calling it ignorant, hypocritical, and morally bankrupt. He reminded audiences that these artifacts were not gifts, not voluntary donations, and not normal trade. They were taken under the shadow of guns, through punitive expeditions, forced treaties, and outright plunder during colonial occupation. Trevor pushed a piercing question. If Europeans truly believed Africans could not protect their own heritage, why was that heritage so desirable that they risked lives, money, and military conflict to seize it? If Africa was supposedly incapable, why was its art good enough to steal, but not good enough to leave in African hands? The idea that Europe is doing Africa a favor by keeping stolen culture safe in its museums, he suggested, is simply colonial arrogance disguised as cultural stewardship. The numbers tell their own. Researchers estimate that over 90% of sub-Saharan Africa's artistic heritage is held. The bulk of it sits in museums and in former colonial powers, places like Britain, France, Belgium, and Germany. Many of these institutions themselves have acknowledged that a significant part of their African collections came from violent raids, punitive campaigns, or during periods of military occupation and extreme imbalance of power. For Africans who visit these museums, the experience can be surreal and painful. One powerful speaker captured it plainly. The priceless artifacts stolen from across the continent now sit proudly displayed in European galleries. Africa and people of African descent pay entrance fees for what was taken from them. They stand in front of cases looking at evidence of theft, evidence of murder, under warm lights and quiet security alarms. The crime is literally on display. That speaker connected the looting of art to the larger story of Blackization. The infamous 3/5 compromise in the state's constitution, not as a status today, but as how Black humanity has long been encoded into law. As we speak today, to emphasize continuity, redlining still shapes communities. As we speak today, Africa older crushing interest rates on loans, paying far more than many users. As we speak today, reparations remain others, but somehow never to Africans. He posed a harsh question. What is wrong with this picture? Why is it that you and I, he asked, are up in one voice and insisting that the bare minimum of justice be done? In his view, no other group on earth would tolerate what has been done, continues to be done, to African people and their descendants. To drive the point home, he flipped the scenario. Imagine if a finger of a British soldier were displayed in a Zimbabwean museum as a trophy. Imagine German soldiers' thumbs sat behind glass in an African gallery, labeled as a souvenir of victory. How long would such an exhibit last before being denounced as barbaric and intolerable? Yet African sacred objects and spiritual symbols are treated as harmless curiosities, stripped of their original meaning and by the descendants of those who took. If this story is resonating with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks colonialism is just a chapter in a history book and not a reality. These conversations matter more than many people want to admit. A man on television tried to anchor his stance in law, preservation, and insight. But critics argue that this is just a sophisticated way of saying, we have your things, we benefit from them, and we do not intend to let them go. European institutions talk about legal limitations, gaps in documentation, or security and conservation in countries. They do not deny the violence of the past. Instead, they use the complexity of the present to avoid full accountability. Yet the ground is shifting, slowly but impeccably. Countries like Nigeria have pushed hard for the return of Benin Bronzes, masterpieces created between the 13th and 18th centuries artists of the Benin Kingdom. These bronzes are not just art. They are historical records, spiritual objects, and symbols of power that were ripped from royal palaces during the British invasion of 1897. After decades of pressure, and European states have begun to act. The Netherlands, for instance, agreed to return 119 Benin Bronzes to Nigeria, one of the largest single restitutions of colonial-era artifacts to date. A Dutch official openly stated that when it is clear objects were taken under duress or stolen during the colonial period, they should be returned to their rightful owners. Those words, rightful owners, directly challenge the narrative that museums in Europe are the only legitimate custodians. Some of the returned pieces are destined for the National Museum in Lagos. Others are being stored in a purpose-built facility linked to the new museum space in Benin City, close to the kingdom that created them in the first place. Official ceremonies mark these handovers, but behind this lies something deeper. A recognition, however partial, history cannot be left entirely as it was written. Even as these returns happen, European institutions still raise concerns about security, climate control, and funding. Critics respond that these arguments sound less like genuine concern and more like excuses piled on top of centuries of delay. When a European claims to be the rightful custodian of an African kingdom's stolen, we hear not professionalism, but a modern form of colonial entitlement. The question at the heart of this story isn't just about law or museums, or even about art. It is about ownership of memory. When an artifact is removed from the soil, the shrines, and the people that gave it life, something far greater than an object is lost. A community loses part of its story, its sense of self, its connection between past and present. So ask yourself this: if your family's heirlooms were taken in war, transported across oceans, and displayed under someone else's flag with the explanation that it would go back then, would you accept that? Would you nod and say the thieves have better storage, better glass, better luck, and therefore better rights? Or would you demand that always been yours be returned, not as a favor, but as a matter of justice? For centuries, the answer to that question has been decided without the consent of the people most affected. The story was written in palaces and parliaments far away, in languages that many original owners did not speak, using laws they did not vote for. Today, those decisions echo in quiet museum halls where security guards patrol and tour guides recite polished scripts that rarely mention blood, fire, and coercion. But outside those walls, the narrative is changing. Artists, historians, activists, and everyday citizens are pushing back. They are tracing the journeys of specific objects, bronze heads, carved masks, royal thrones, from sacred altars and royal courts in Africa to the auction houses and galleries of Europe. They are documenting the raids, the treaties, the so-called gifts made at gunpoint. Piece by piece, they are explaining how legal ownership was constructed on top of violence and domination. In many ways, arguments we hear now are part of a larger battle over whose version of history becomes the official one. The European commentator insists that the story begins and ends with legality, There were laws, there were wars, objects changed hands, that. But for the communities who created these objects, the story is much. It stretches back to the moment the sculptor shaped metal into a king's likeness, the first priest blessed before a ceremony, the first art passed a secret technique down an apprentice. When those objects were taken, it was not only property that was removed, it was context. A bronze plaque that once hung in a surrounded by rituals and meanings that a local child understood, now sits in a foreign hall where it is reduced to a fine example of African art. The label might mention a date, a region, perhaps even a kingdom name, but it can convey what it meant to kneel before that object in worship or stand before it as a symbol of authority. That is why the simple offer of exhibitions feels so hollow to many. You cannot loan someone what is already there and call it generosity. You cannot strip their heritage, dismiss it, and then ask them to be grateful for temporary access. A traveling is valuable, yes. Inspire pride, education, and reconnection. But when used as a substitute restitution, it becomes another way of saying, we are still in control. At the same time, the demand for restitution is not just about cargo flight and shipping crates moving objects from one building to another. It is also about rebuilding institutions itself. Museums in Lagos, Dakar, Nairobi, Accra, Ababa, Johannesburg, and beyond are being reconceived not just as quiet storage spaces, but as living of African memory. Young curators are reading how African art is displayed and interpreted, not as exotic curiosities, but as central pillars of human civilization. This is where the argument about readiness becomes so dangerous. When European voices say, Africa is not ready, or the security is not sufficient, they are not simply describing challenges. They are also in the same hierarchy that justified the original theft. The unspoken assumption is clear. You are not capable, we are. You are not responsible enough, we are. Your institutions are weak, ours are strong. Therefore, we will what you created until we decide worthy of it. And yet, as we see with the Benin Bronzes returned from African institutions building the capacity they need. Specialized storage, climate-controlled facilities, and trained conservation staff are being developed. Slowly, often under financial pressure, but undeniably and deliberately. Every time a return is made and an African institution successfully receives, documents, and displays those objects, the readiness excuse loses more of its power. Across the diaspora, ordinarily are watching this unfold with a mixture of anger, hope, and suspicion. Anger at how long it has taken for even the first steps made. Hope that once seemed impossible, Europeans voluntarily returning looted heritage, is starting to happen. Suspicion that, despite the hopeful headlines, many of the most powerful institutions for as long as they can. If you believe these stories need to be told plainly, fear or apology, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It may seem small, but it helps into spaces where people would rather look away. At its core, the clash between the European commentator and his critics is a clash between moral codes. One says, the law of the conqueror is final and is too messy to untangle. The other says, even if we cannot correct every injustice, we must start with the ones we can clearly see, document, and repair. One side hides behind the difficulty of drawing. The other insists that the law must at least be drawn somewhere, beginning with the most obvious and egregious cases of colonial plunder. Trevor Noah's response cut through the technical language and spoke directly to that moral core. Do not pretend that restitution is simple or that returning a statue will erase centuries of harm. Instead, he pointed out the insult embedded in the status quo, that the same people who once declared African cultures inferior now have the right to safeguard the best of those cultures indefinitely. It is as if someone broke into your house, took your most precious heirlooms, locked them in their safe, and then told you that you should be grateful because they have better insurance. The African voices calling for reparations link the debate over artifacts to broader economic and political realities. They note that while looted art sits behind glass as a symbol of universal heritage. Many African nations trapped in cycles of debt and fair trade and political pressure rooted in the same colonial history that produced those loots. Some argue that artifacts without addressing financial and structural injustice is like returning stolen jewelry while still holding the deed to the house. Others push back and say, even if we cannot solve everything at once, each piece returned is one. Each artifact that goes home contradicts the idea that nothing can change. It gives young tangible symbol resistance is not just emotional. It can produce real, material results. When a bronze head that once sat in a European gallery is installed in a museum a short drive from the palace it came from, generations of children can look at it and it is not only something to be learned in books, something that has literally come back to them. This is why so many people on and off the continent see museums not just as things, but as battleground narrative. For a long time, African civilizations were portrayed as marginal, derivative, or primitive. Yet the very existence of these intricate bronzes, ivories, textiles, and sculptures tells a different story. A story of technical mastery, political complexity, and aesthetic depth that rivals any other culture on Earth. When those objects are locked away in foreign institutions, the story is obscured. When they return, even partially, the story becomes harder to deny. In the coming years, more governments, museum collectors will have to decide where they stand. Will cling to the old defense, that the law, that time has washed away responsibility, that their role as custodians outweighs any due to return. Others will begin negotiations, sign agreements, pack crates, not out of guilt alone, but out of a recognition that their prestige doesn't to be built on someone else's loss. Meanwhile, you, watching and listening, will continue to shape the pressure around them. Every conversation, every article shared, every question raised at a public core adds to a growing insistence that the age of unquestioned possession is over. Television and confidently declares that is spoils of war, more and more fear not wisdom, but a confession that the old mindset of empire is still alive. And when you strip away the polite language, that is what the European commentator's position really represents. The old belief that power decides who owns and that the victims should learn to live it. It is a belief that the people who suffer possession should be grateful for preservation, that the archive is more important than community's memory. But history has never been as fixed as those in power like to pretend. Borders change. Laws are rewritten. Statues fall. What seemed normal and unquestionable in one era becomes shameful in the next. There was a time when human beings could be bought and sold under the full protection of the law. There was a time when segregation, apartheid, and formal colonial rule were not only tolerated but enforced. All of those paperwork, regulations, and official stamps. None of that makes them any. This is why the argument, it was legal back then, rings so hollow to so many people. It asks the victims of injustice to respect the rules created by their oppressors. Oppressors have admitted that the rules themselves were cruel. It is a request for coded in legal jargon. It tells the descendants of the looted to accept judgment that they never had the power to contest. Across Africa diaspora, more people are refusing that silence. They are asking questions that cut straight through museum walls. If these truly belong to humanity, why does humanity seem to have a European dress? If these artifacts are so universal, why is their universal home almost always far from the soil, the languages, and the rituals that birthed them? If you are sincere about honoring African civilization, honor the people who still live in the shadow of those civilizations. Even the framing of universal museums is being challenged. For a long time, major institutions in Europe justified collections by claiming to be guard world culture accessible to everyone. In theory, anyone could walk their doors and see the treasures of the world for the price of a ticket. In reality, the people whose heritage fills those rooms often need visas, plane tickets, money just to stand in front of what was taken by their ancestors. Think about that contrast for a moment. a carved deep in an African forest, used in ceremonies to guide and protect a community, is now behind glass in a city thousands of kilometers away. The people whose shaped spirit represented in that mask might never see it again, while tourists for photos in front of it, reading captions that mention tribal anonymous craftsmen. The object survived, but a part of its soul was exiled. As debates intensify, more institutions are being forced to acknowledge that the story of how an object was acquired is just a bureaucratic detail. It is often a wreck of violence. Terms like confiscated edition, taken as indemnity, or collecting a military campaign, are now being read with fresh eyes. These words were used casually, even proudly in catalogs. Today, they are starting to sound like confession. At the same time, not everyone agrees on how far restitution should go or how fast. Some argue that returning objects without preparation could lead to neglect or even theft. Others worry about political interference, corruption, or instability in certain regions. These concerns are not always malicious. They reflect real challenges, but they can also be used as shields to delay action indefinitely. That is why the conversation is shifting from "should anything be returned?" to "how do we return what we can?" The Benin Bronzes are a powerful example precisely because their story is so well documented. We know when they were taken, who took them, and from where. We know the names of the kingdoms involved. We know the military that broke down palace doors. In such cases, pretending there is no clear pattern to justify. There are also creative solutions being discussed. Some propose shared stewardship agreements, where ownership is legally transferred to the country of origin, but long-term loans, joint exhibitions, and collaborative research continue. Others suggest regional hubs, where returned objects from multiple countries be conserved and displayed under shared African management. These ideas are not perfect, will not satisfy everyone, but they show that the debate is evolving beyond simple yes positions. What remains non-negotiable for many is the principle that the people who created these civilizations should not be treated as permanent outsiders to their own heritage. Whether full restitution, joint custody, or other arrangement, the current cannot be defended forever by pointing to old laws and old practices. If you are still, it means you care and think beyond the surface. Take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who believes this is just about old statues. It is about much that. It is about who is allowed to own the past and who is told to simply move on. The disclaimer that often appears at the end of reports like this is remember, this debate is complex, it is ongoing. Different legal systems, different historical, different political interests here. No single video, voice, can claim to deliver the final verdict. The most responsible thing anyone can do is to present the facts as accurately as possible, highlight the arguments made, viewers to seek out multiple perspectives. Publicly available reports from historians, professionals, legal scholars, and activists all add layers to this story. Some emphasize international law, others focus on moral responsibility, still others center the voices of communities who lived with these objects long before any foreign collection. When you listen closely, you realize there is no narrative, but a tangled web of stories that need to be heard side by side. What this particular clash between a European commentator and his critics reveals is not only a disagreement about art, but a disagreement about memory and power. It insists that because the artifacts are safer and better conserved in European museums, their presence there is justified. The other side argues safety without justice is just a more polished form of domination. An object away in a vault may be physically protected, but the injustice that it there remains unhealed. And so, the question lingers in the air. When future generations look back at this moment, choices will they see as obvious, and whose arguments will they recognize as attempts to hold on to an unfair advantage? Will they see the defense of spoils of war as a real position, or as the last echo of an era that refused responsibility for its own history? Maybe in the end, that is the real time. Not whether we can catalog every object, trace every shipping route, or quote every law, but whether we can look at the truth of what happened and choose dignity over denial. The artifacts in those glass cases are not just objects. They are mirrors. We see the courage of the people who made them and the violence of those who took them. We see the brilliance of African civilizations and the lengths to which the world went to hide that brilliance behind foreign walls. One day, a child will stand in front of one of those bronzes or masks or carvings, not in London or Paris, but in Lagos, in Abidjan, in Kigali, in Luanda, in Harare, in Kinshasa. That child will not need a visa to see their own heritage. They will not have to pay to look at what was once stolen from their ancestors. They will simply be standing at home, in a museum built by their own people, hearing a story told in their own languages. When that day comes, it will not erase the past, but it will say clearly that the future belongs to those who refuse to accept stolen glory as normal. And that is where you come in. These stories do not spread themselves. They are carried by people who care enough to listen, to feel, and to act. If this moved you, even a little, if you felt that twist in your chest when you imagined your own family's history locked away in someone else's house, then do not just click away and forget. Take a moment right now to like this video so it reaches more eyes. Share it with a friend, a colleague, or a family member who still thinks this is just old history. Leave a thoughtful comment, add your voice, your perspective, your experience. Those conversations matter more than you know. If you believe that African stories deserve to be told with courage and without apology, if you want to be part of a community that refuses to be silent about injustice, then subscribe and stay with us. Every subscription is a signal that these narratives are worth amplifying. And if you are able, consider supporting this work through Super Thanks. It is not just a button. It is a way of saying that telling the truth about Africa's past and present is worth investing in. Because in the end, restitution is not only about objects traveling home. It is about voices rising one by one until they are too loud to ignore. It is about refusing to let anyone else write the final chapter of our story without us. Your support, your view, your like, your share, your comment, your subscription, your super thanks,